Well, first of all, thank you. I thought he was my friend. I just told him, you know. It's great to be here again. I was here last year with the University of Colorado and Colorado Mesa, and I understand John McCain came by earlier, and he got the designation of being the Maverick with Colorado Mesa. This makes me the Buffalo, which I'm not sure how I feel about. So do I have to say American Bison, or can I say Buffalo? Buffalo, okay, good, good. But seriously, it's great to see everybody again this year, and I'm here because of Mark. You know, he's a good friend. He's a guy who I share a lot in common with. We both like to kayak and do outdoor stuff. I don't climb like, you know, 14,000-foot peaks like he does. I stop at about 4,000. Actually, Ohio only has them to about 2,000. But we do enjoy that and doing stuff together, and we both decided to name our sons Jed. Don't tell our wives that, okay, because they think it was their idea. But both Jane and I enjoy Mark and Maggie, and it's an example of where in this place where you think, you know, all there is partisan gridlock and polarization, you can work together and get things done. You can disagree without being disagreeable. Mark and I don't agree on everything, but we do find common ground on issues. And right now, we need that in this country. Let's face it. One of the issues where we found common ground is on energy. He's sort of more on the green side, and I'm more maybe on the production side. But we both share this belief that what we ought to be doing is producing more and using less. And as a conservative, a fiscal conservative, I believe that conservation and specifically energy efficiency makes sense. And I've introduced legislation to do that. It's actually bipartisan, got out of our committee, Mark, with a 18-3 vote. And Mark's been one of the leaders on that. And so, you know, there are places where you can find common ground. I will tell you that the frustrating part is, even though we have this bipartisan legislation that could save considerable amounts of energy, make us less dependent on foreign energy, improve our economy through efficiencies, we can't get it to the floor for a vote. So, I mean, it is difficult sometimes, even when you can find common ground, particularly in a political year, to move something forward. I'm hopeful we'll be able to do that maybe even this summer. And if we do that, you know, Mark will be playing a leading role, as he does on a number of issues that make sense, that are, you know, common sense ideas where you can find a bipartisan consensus. The bigger issue that relates to energy and healthcare and taxes and regulations, and really almost every other issue outside of foreign policy, is how do we get this economy moving again? And the numbers on Friday really discouraged me, because I thought we were going to start to see a little pickup in the economy. It doesn't look good. And unfortunately, it confirms my belief, which I've held for some time now, that we really have some fundamental problems in our economy that are only going to be addressed by looking at the structures, like our tax system, which is antiquated and inefficient and not serving anybody well. So we argue here a lot about, do you allow the so-called Bush tax cuts, which have been in place for 11 years now, to stay in place, or do you get rid of them? My answer is, what you need is tax reform. And by the way, economists across the board, right, left, and center, agree our current code is inefficient and antiquated, doesn't allocate resources properly. And generally speaking, there is a consensus, not with everybody, but generally speaking, that we ought to be lowering the marginal rate and broadening the base, meaning getting rid of a lot of the tax preferences, otherwise known as loopholes or tax breaks. I'll give you one example on the corporate side, which is something that some people in this room care about, who are involved with businesses both domestically and internationally. We have fallen behind the rest of the world, both in terms of our tax rate and the complexity of our code. So in 1986, we reduced our tax rate on the corporate side to 34% to put it at the bottom half of the countries we compete with, the other developed countries. Today, all those countries, with the exception of the United States, in the last 2.5 decades, have lowered their rates and reformed their tax code to make it more efficient, except us. We're the only ones. And so this is one reason I've been pushing, and Mark and others have been talking about the need for us to restructure and reform our tax code to make it, again, more competitive, so that we can indeed get this economy moving again and have the robust recovery we all hope for. But it is a good example where if we don't get our act together and do this, companies will leave our country. We've lost a lot of corporate headquarters already. I was talking to some folks in the beer industry recently, and primarily because of tax-motivated purchases. The largest beer company now in America, I happen to be a beer drinker, so this was particularly of interest to me, is Sam Adams with 1% market share. All the rest are foreign-owned. There's a company near my hometown called Brown-Forman that does distilled spirits, and they showed me a list of the 10 acquisitions that have been made in the last year in that area, and almost every one of them have been a foreign acquirer. Why? Tax code. Because they have a preference. They have an advantage, a competitive advantage, and they're able to pay a premium. So this is happening right now, and we need to get on it. Same with regulations. Everybody knows we need to have regulations, but they should be smart regulations. They should be based on a cost-benefit analysis and the least burdensome alternative, the most efficient way to get to a determined policy objective. And by the way, Congress ought to make some of these fundamental decisions, not the regulators. We're the elected officials. And, you know, so Mark and I may not agree on all of this in terms of the regulatory side, because there are a lot of environmental issues and other issues, but I think we can agree that it ought to be based on an analysis that looks at the costs and the benefits, including the impact on jobs. And then again, we come up with the most cost-effective way to achieve those objectives. That's not currently the case. So there are things we can do as a country to move us forward, whether it's taxes or regulations, certainly looking at the deficit and debt and reducing those, which are a danger to all of us and will lead us to a fiscal crisis unless we change it. We can look no further than across the Atlantic at what's happening today there. We followed Greece into democracy. We don't need to follow them into bankruptcy. And that's the way we're headed. And with smart, sensible guys like Mark Udall working together on a bipartisan basis, we must address these issues. The next 6 months, you know, will be pretty political, let's face it. It's going to be tough. But in those 6 months after the presidential election, regardless of who wins, and, you know, I'm going to be pushing for Mitt Romney and getting a majority in the Senate, and Mark's going to be on the other side of that. But regardless of what happens, we have to figure out a way to come together, because those next 6 months are going to be crucial for the direction of the country. We have a $5 trillion tax increase coming. We have these huge changes in the Department of Defense. Mark and I are both on the Armed Services Committee. They're not based on a military plan, but based on an across-the-board cut that's arbitrary, that really does endanger us and our ability to project force around the country, around the world. I just came back from Afghanistan yesterday. Very tough situation there, but we got to be sure that we're supporting our soldiers, our Marines, airmen, and sailors with a smart plan, not just a plan that says we're going to lop off the spending through an arbitrary, across-the-board, what's called a sequester. And by the way, I'm not saying the Pentagon shouldn't be on the table. It should. Everything needs to be on the table and be looked at. Everything. But I am saying that we ought to be doing it in a smart way, and we're not doing that here in the United States Congress today. We have a responsibility, and I think, again, in those crucial 6 months after the election, in what's called the lame duck session in the first part of the next Congress, we're going to need to draw on people like Mark and others to pull together as a country and make some of these tough decisions. So, sorry not to have happier news for you today from Washington, D.C., for our friends from Colorado, but it's great to, again, see some of you again this year, and I'm here again because of Mark and the partnership we have, and the hope is that through some of these partnerships and through working together and finding that common ground between us, we can begin to turn this country around. Thank you all very much.